The morning mist clung to the tracks at London's St. Pancras International as history prepared to unfold in the most unexpected way. For the first time in her seven-decade reign, Queen Elizabeth II was about to board a passenger train that would carry her beneath the English Channel, a journey that would break royal protocol, challenge centuries of tradition, and create a moment that would forever change how the world saw the British monarchy. This wasn't just any train ride. This was a 95-year-old monarch choosing to travel like her people, crossing the waters that had once protected her island kingdom, to honor the heroes who had sacrificed everything for freedom. In a world where royal travel meant private jets and armored motorcades, she was about to become just another passenger on the Eurostar. Except nothing about this journey would be ordinary. What happened during those crucial hours beneath the Channel and in the streets of Paris would reveal truths about duty, memory, and the unbreakable bonds between nations. Some moments change history. Others remind us why history matters. This is the story of both. The early morning light filtered through the tall glass ceiling of St. Pancras International Station as security teams made their final sweeps. It was June 6, 2014, and London's busiest international railway terminal had never seen anything quite like what was about to unfold. Behind the scenes, months of planning were coming together for a journey that would make headlines around the world. Queen Elizabeth II stood in the private royal waiting room, her familiar handbag clutched firmly in her gloved hands. At 88 years old, she had traveled the world countless times, but never like this. Today, she would become the first reigning British monarch to travel to France by passenger train through the Channel Tunnel. The decision had surprised her advisors, thrilled the French, and captured the imagination of millions. The Queen's morning had begun at Windsor Castle, where she had reviewed the day's schedule one final time with her private secretary. The journey to Paris wasn't just about transportation, it was about symbolism. 70 years after D-Day, the Queen was choosing to travel beneath the very waters that had once separated Britain from occupied Europe. The channel that had protected her island nation during the war would now serve as a bridge to commemoration and friendship. Lady Susan Hussey, one of the Queen's longest-serving ladies-in-waiting, had expressed quiet concern about the unconventional nature of the journey. "Your Majesty," she had said carefully, "the security arrangements are quite different from what we usually manage." The Queen had smiled, a rare glimpse of mischief in her eyes. "Susan, sometimes one must trust in the ordinary, extraordinary kindness of people." At the station, Platform 1 had been carefully prepared for the royal departure. The usual crowd of tourists and business travelers had been redirected to other platforms, but curious faces pressed against the glass barriers, phones ready to capture this historic moment. The Eurostar train, gleaming in its distinctive yellow and blue livery, waited like a patient steel serpent ready to carry its most distinguished passenger. The Queen's entourage was deliberately small for this journey. Alongside Lady Susan, she was accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, though Prince Philip had grumbled about the unnecessary fuss surrounding what he called a simple train ride. Their protection officers had spent weeks coordinating with French security services, Eurostar personnel, and railway authorities across two countries. As the Queen approached the platform, station staff lined up with barely contained excitement. Sarah Mitchell, a young customer service supervisor, had been chosen to greet the royal party. Her hands trembled slightly as she curtsied, but the Queen's warm smile immediately put her at ease. "What a lovely station this is," the Queen remarked, genuinely admiring the Victorian Gothic architecture that soared above them. "It reminds one of the great age of railway travel." The Eurostar's general manager, Mike Cooper, had spent sleepless nights ensuring every detail was perfect. The train had been thoroughly inspected, the route cleared, and contingency plans prepared for every conceivable situation. As he welcomed the Queen aboard, he felt the weight of history. Never before had a British monarch traveled beneath the Channel. The engineering marvel that connected Britain to continental Europe was about to carry its most precious cargo. The Queen's carriage had been specially prepared, but she had insisted on minimal modifications. She wanted to experience the journey much as any passenger would. The standard first-class cabin had been enhanced only with additional security communications equipment and a small bouquet of English roses, a personal touch from the French President François Hollande, who would greet her in Paris. As the Queen settled into her seat, she looked out the window at the bustling platform. Regular passengers on other trains caught glimpses of the royal party, and word spread quickly through social media. Within minutes, images of the Queen boarding the Eurostar were circulating worldwide. The sight of the monarch carrying her own handbag and walking unassisted to her carriage struck a chord with people everywhere. Prince Philip, settling into the seat beside his wife, opened a newspaper with characteristic directness. At 93, he had long since mastered the art of appearing relaxed in extraordinary circumstances. "Well, my dear," he said quietly, "shall we see what all the fuss is about this tunnel of theirs?" The Queen chuckled softly, a sound that carried decades of shared adventures and gentle humor. The departure was precisely on time at 11:20 a.m. As the train began to move, a small crowd of railway workers and station staff waved from the platform. The Queen, ever conscious of protocol and kindness, raised her hand in response. It was a simple gesture, but it would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. The journey through London's outer suburbs revealed a different perspective of her capital city. From the elevated tracks, the Queen could see into gardens and neighborhoods she rarely viewed from ground level. Children in a school playground spotted the distinctive yellow train and waved enthusiastically, not knowing who was aboard but sensing something special was happening. As the train picked up speed through the Kent countryside, the Queen reflected on the significance of the day. D-Day had been a turning point not just in the war, but in her own young life. In 1944, she had been an 18-year-old princess training as a driver and mechanic in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. While Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, she had been learning to repair truck engines and change tires, desperate to contribute to the war effort. The memories were vivid still. She remembered the tension at Buckingham Palace as news filtered back from France. Her father, King George VI, had paced the corridors, desperate for updates on the invasion's progress. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth, had maintained her usual composure while privately worrying about the thousands of young men facing death on foreign shores. Lady Susan noticed the Queen's contemplative mood and recognized the signs. After decades of service, she had learned to read her monarch's thoughts with remarkable accuracy. "The French are greatly honored by your presence today, Your Majesty," she said softly. The Queen nodded, still gazing out the window. "As are we to be received by them? This anniversary belongs to all of us, British, American, Canadian, French, all who stood together when it mattered most." The train manager, James Harrison, approached discreetly to ensure the royal party was comfortable. He had worked for Eurostar for 15 years, but had never imagined he would one day serve tea to the Queen of England at 186 miles per hour. "Your Majesty will be approaching the Channel Tunnel entrance in approximately 20 minutes, he informed her with practiced professionalism. The Queen thanked him graciously and returned to her observations of the passing landscape. They were now traveling through the Garden of England, Kent's famous orchards, and hop fields stretching to the horizon. This was countryside she knew well from numerous royal visits and garden parties, but seeing it from a train window gave her a fresh perspective on the land she had served for over 6 decades. Prince Philip, having finished scanning the newspapers, began pointing out landmarks to his wife with the enthusiasm of a much younger man. Despite his sometimes gruff public persona, his deep knowledge of history and geography never failed to impress those around him. "There's Canterbury Cathedral," he noted as the ancient spires came into view. Remarkable to think Beckett met his end there over 800 years ago, and here we are, zipping past at nearly 200 kilometers per hour. The conversation drew the attention of their security detail, though the protection officers maintained their professional vigilance. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Thompson had been responsible for royal security for over a decade, but this assignment presented unique challenges. Unlike the controlled environment of royal flights or motorcades, the Eurostar journey involved numerous variables: station stops, tunnel passages, and coordination with multiple international security services. As they approached the tunnel entrance near Folkestone, the Queen felt a slight increase in her pulse. This moment represented something unprecedented in her reign. No British monarch had ever traveled to continental Europe by rail through the Channel Tunnel. The engineering achievement itself was remarkable, a 31-mile underwater passage that had taken 6 years to complete and had cost the lives of 10 workers during construction. The Queen had officially opened the Channel Tunnel in 1994, cutting a ribbon alongside President Mitterrand in a ceremony that symbolized the new era of Anglo-French cooperation. But this journey was different. Today, she was trusting her safety to this marvel of modern engineering while traveling to honor those who had died fighting for the freedom that made such cooperation possible. The train entered the tunnel with barely perceptible change, except for the darkening of the windows. They were now traveling beneath the English Channel, suspended in a tube, surrounded by millions of tons of water and chalk. The engineering precision required to maintain this passage was staggering, and the Queen found herself appreciating anew the human capacity for innovation and determination. Inside the tunnel, conversation naturally turned to the purpose of their journey. The 70th anniversary of D-Day represented more than just historical commemoration. It was an opportunity to honor the surviving veterans, many now in their 90s, and to ensure their sacrifices would never be forgotten by future generations. The Queen had met thousands of D-Day veterans over the years. Each encounter had left its mark on her. She remembered their stories: young men who had lied about their age to enlist, families torn apart by war, moments of terror, and courage that had shaped the course of history. Today's ceremony in Paris would be her opportunity to speak for a grateful nation and to bridge the past with the present. As the train sped through the underwater tunnel, the Queen thought about the symbolic power of her journey. She was traveling beneath waters that had once been crossed by invasion fleets, through engineering that represented peaceful cooperation between former enemies. The contrast was not lost on her, and she knew it would not be lost on the world watching her unprecedented journey. The transition from the tunnel's artificial lighting back to French daylight was gradual but unmistakable. Through the train windows, the landscape had changed from English countryside to the distinctive flat plains of northern France. The Queen observed the transformation with keen interest, noting how the architecture of farmhouses and the layout of fields differed from what they had passed through in Kent just minutes earlier. "Bienvenue in France, Your Majesty," announced the train manager in carefully practiced French, bringing a smile to the Queen's face. She had studied French since childhood and maintained fluency throughout her reign, though she rarely had occasion to use it publicly. Today would be different. Today she would speak to the French people in their own language, honoring them and the shared sacrifice that bound their nations together. The approach to Calais revealed a landscape heavy with history. These fields had witnessed centuries of conflict between Britain and France, from medieval battles to the trenches of World War I. Now they rushed past the windows of a train carrying the British monarch toward a celebration of friendship and alliance. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Prince Philip, ever the naval officer, pointed toward the distant coastline. "Somewhere over there," he said thoughtfully, "thousands of ships gathered 70 years ago for the greatest seaborne invasion in history. Young men who had never seen combat prepared to change the world." His voice carried the weight of personal memory. As a young naval officer, he had served in the Mediterranean during the war, seeing action that he rarely discussed but never forgot. The Queen nodded, her thoughts drawn to the same memories. She had vivid recollections of D-Day from her perspective as an 18-year-old princess. The palace had been electric with tension as news filtered back from the beaches. Her parents had maintained public confidence while privately agonizing over reports of casualties and German resistance. Lady Susan Hussey quietly reviewed the day's schedule, ensuring every detail remained on track. The precision required for royal visits was extraordinary under normal circumstances, but this international ceremony involving multiple heads of state presented unique challenges. French protocol officers had worked for months with their British counterparts to ensure seamless coordination. As the train began to slow for its stop at Calais-Fréthun, security preparations intensified. French police units had secured the station, while plainclothes officers mingled with regular passengers and railway staff. The Queen would not leave the train at this stop, but protocol demanded maximum vigilance at every point of the journey. Through the window, the Queen caught glimpses of French citizens who had gathered hoping for a glimpse of her historic passage. A group of children from a local school held small British and French flags, their faces bright with excitement. An elderly man in a wheelchair, wearing what appeared to be military medals, saluted as the train passed. These spontaneous displays of affection and respect moved the Queen deeply. The French countryside between Calais and Paris unfolded like a living history book. The Queen recognized towns and regions she had visited during previous state visits, but seeing them from the train offered a different perspective. The rural landscapes looked peaceful and prosperous, a stark contrast to the devastation these same areas had endured during 2 world wars. "It's remarkable how quickly the land heals," the Queen observed to her companions. "These fields have seen such suffering, yet they bloom again each spring." It was a metaphor she had often contemplated, the resilience of both land and people in recovering from trauma and finding ways to move forward. The train's speed and smoothness impressed everyone aboard. At nearly 200 miles per hour, they were covering ground that would have taken armies weeks to traverse during the war. Technology had not only made the journey possible, but had transformed the very nature of European cooperation. What had once required military conquest could now be achieved through diplomatic partnership and shared values. Media coverage of the journey was extensive. News helicopters followed the train's progress, while international television networks provided live coverage of this unprecedented royal journey. Social media buzzed with images and commentary from people who spotted the distinctive Eurostar along its route. The Queen's decision to travel by train had captured global imagination in ways that traditional royal transport never could. Inside the train, conversation turned to the upcoming ceremony in Paris. The Queen would join President François Hollande and other world leaders in commemorating the D-Day landings. But this ceremony held special significance. It would be one of the last major D-Day anniversaries with substantial numbers of surviving veterans in attendance. The Queen had spent considerable time preparing her remarks for the ceremony. She wanted to speak not just as a head of state, but as someone who had lived through the war years and understood their continuing impact on European history. Her words would need to honor the dead, thank the living, and inspire future generations to remember the cost of freedom. Prince Philip shared his own memories of the war years, drawing connections between past sacrifice and present responsibility. "The young men who died on those beaches," he said quietly, "they died for the idea that people should be free to choose their own destiny. That's what we're really commemorating, not just military victory, but the triumph of human dignity over tyranny." The countryside outside Paris began to change as they approached the capital. Industrial areas gave way to suburban neighborhoods, and the train speed gradually decreased as they entered the complex network of tracks serving the French capital. The Queen had visited Paris many times during her reign, but always by air or sea. This ground-level approach offered new perspectives on the city that had played such a crucial role in European history. Gare du Nord came into view as the train made its final approach. The station had been transformed for the royal arrival, with French security forces establishing multiple layers of protection. President Hollande would greet the Queen personally, marking another historic moment in Anglo-French relations. The Queen checked her appearance one final time, ensuring her hat was properly positioned and her handbag ready. She had chosen to wear blue, a color that would complement the French tricolor and signal her respect for her hosts. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully considered to convey appropriate messages of dignity, respect, and friendship. As the train glided into Gare du Nord, hundreds of invited guests waited on the platform. French officials, British embassy staff, and carefully selected members of the public stood in precise formations, creating corridors for the royal party's arrival. Television cameras captured every moment as history unfolded in real time. The Queen could see President Hollande waiting near the train's stopping point, flanked by his security detail and protocol officers. The French president had taken a considerable political risk by inviting the Queen to travel by Eurostar. If anything had gone wrong during the tunnel crossing, his government would have faced severe criticism. His visible relief at the train's safe arrival was evident even from a distance. Children from local schools lined sections of the platform, waving small flags and holding welcome signs written in English and French. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and even the usually reserved royal protection officers couldn't help but smile at the youngsters' excitement. The train came to a complete stop with characteristic European precision. Railway staff immediately began their final safety checks, while platform officials took their positions for the formal arrival ceremony. The moment had arrived for the Queen to step on a French soil and begin the next phase of her historic D-Day commemoration journey. Lady Susan Hussey gathered her belongings and prepared to accompany her monarch into another chapter of royal history. After decades of serving the Queen, she had witnessed many significant moments, but this journey felt particularly special. The combination of historical anniversary, technological achievement, and diplomatic symbolism created a perfect storm of significance. The Queen took a deep breath and prepared to stand. At 88 years old, she was about to embark on another set of royal duties that would honor the past while strengthening bonds for the future. The underground journey beneath the channel had been completed successfully, but the real work of commemoration was just beginning. Prince Philip stood first, offering his arm to his wife with the gallantry that had characterized their relationship for over 6 decades. Together, they prepared to represent not just the British monarchy, but the enduring values that had triumphed over fascism 70 years earlier. The doors of the Eurostar opened, and history stepped on a platform 3 at Gare du Nord. The moment Queen Elizabeth II stepped onto the platform at Gare du Nord, a surge of emotion swept through the assembled crowd. President François Hollande moved forward with characteristic French formality, but his smile revealed genuine warmth and relief that this historic journey had been completed safely. The first reigning British monarch to travel to France via the Channel Tunnel had arrived, and the significance was not lost on anyone present. "Your Majesty," President Hollande said in accented but careful English, "France welcomes you with great honor and gratitude." He bowed slightly, a gesture that perfectly balanced Republican French protocol with respect for the visiting sovereign. The Queen's response was equally gracious. "Mr. President, thank you for your warm welcome. It is a privilege to be here on this most important anniversary." The platform ceremony was brief, but meaningful. A children's choir from a local Paris school sang both national anthems, their young voices echoing through the vast station roof. Among them stood Marie-Claire Dubois, whose great-grandfather had been a resistance fighter during the German occupation. Her presence, along with that of several other children with family connections to the war, created a living bridge between past sacrifice and future hope. As the royal party moved through the station, ordinary travelers found themselves witnessing an extraordinary moment. Business commuters stopped to take photos, tourists pressed against barriers for better views, and station staff lined the walkways. The Queen acknowledged each group with small waves and nods, turning what could have been a formal protocol march into a genuine human connection. Jean-Baptiste Martin, a veteran station announcer who had worked at Gare du Nord for 35 years, had the honor of making the official welcome announcement. His voice, usually reserved for train departures and platform changes, carried special emotion as he declared in both French and English, "Ladies and gentlemen, Gare du Nord is honored to welcome Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on this historic day of remembrance. The security arrangements were impressive, but unobtrusive. French police had established multiple security zones, while British protection officers coordinated seamlessly with their French counterparts. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Thompson had worked closely with French security services for months, creating protocols that would ensure safety without diminishing the ceremony's impact. Outside the station, Paris had transformed itself for the Queen's visit. Tricolor flags hung alongside Union Jacks from buildings throughout the city center. Street banners in French and English proclaimed, "Welcome to Queen Elizabeth" and "Honoring our heroes together." The visual symbolism of cooperation and friendship was unmistakable. The motorcade through Paris provided the Queen with views of a city she knew well, but had never approached from this direction. Coming from Gare du Nord rather than Charles de Gaulle Airport offered different perspectives on neighborhoods and landmarks. She noted the changes since her last state visit: new buildings, restored monuments, and the continuing evolution of this ancient capital. Prince Philip pointed out various sites with his characteristic blend of historical knowledge and personal observation. "There's the Arc de Triomphe," he noted as it came into view. "Napoleon's monument to his own glory, now serving as a memorial to unknown soldiers. Rather fitting. Actually, the anonymous heroes matter more than the famous generals." The route had been carefully chosen to pass several war memorials and sites significant to French resistance during the German occupation. At each location, small crowds had gathered to witness the royal passage. Many elderly Parisians stood among the spectators, people who remembered the liberation of Paris in 1944 and understood the personal significance of this day for their generation. Lady Susan Hussey discreetly reviewed the afternoon schedule, ensuring all timing remained precise. The complexity of coordinating international protocols while maintaining security and managing media coverage required exceptional organizational skills. Every minute had been planned, yet allowances had been made for the spontaneous moments that make royal visits memorable. The motorcade passed through the Place de la Concorde, where the Queen observed the scene with particular interest. This square had witnessed some of the French Revolution's most dramatic moments, including the execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Now it served as a symbol of French democracy and European cooperation. The historical irony was not lost on a monarch whose own survival depended on constitutional adaptation and public acceptance. As they approached the Élysée Palace, the Queen reflected on the remarkable transformation in Anglo-French relations during her reign. When she had ascended to the throne in 1952, the two nations were allies but maintained traditional rivalry and suspicion. 70 years later, they were partners in European integration, NATO cooperation, and shared democratic values. The journey from Street Pancras to Paris symbolized more than royal travel. It represented the evolution of European civilization itself. President Hollande waited at the Élysée Palace with his full protocol team. The building, official residence of French presidents since 1873, had hosted numerous historic meetings between British and French leaders. Today's visit would add another chapter to that diplomatic legacy, with particular significance due to the D-Day anniversary context. The formal arrival ceremony at the Élysée included military honors from the Republican Guard, their distinctive uniforms, and precise movements reflecting centuries of French military tradition. The Queen, herself colonel-in-chief of numerous British regiments, appreciated the ceremonial excellence and the respect it demonstrated for her role as both head of state and commander-in-chief. During the private meeting between the Queen and President Hollande, conversation covered both ceremonial preparations and broader issues of European cooperation. The French president expressed particular gratitude for Britain's role in D-Day planning and execution, noting that the success of the invasion had depended critically on British naval and air support, intelligence gathering, and strategic deception. The Queen spoke personally about her memories of D-Day as an 18-year-old princess desperate to contribute to the war effort. She described the tension at Buckingham Palace as reports came in from the beaches, the relief when initial objectives were secured, and the growing realization that victory might finally be achievable. Her first-hand recollections added personal dimension to what could otherwise be purely ceremonial proceedings. Preparations for the main commemoration ceremony were extensive. Veterans organizations from multiple countries had coordinated to ensure maximum participation by surviving D-Day participants. At ages ranging from 88 to 95, these men represented the last generation with personal memory of that crucial day. Their presence would provide authenticity and emotional power that no amount of ceremonial planning could replicate. The Queen's speech preparation had involved consultation with historians, veterans advocates, and diplomatic advisors. She wanted her words to honor specific sacrifices while addressing universal themes of courage, cooperation, and the ongoing responsibility to preserve democratic values. The speech would be delivered in both English and French, demonstrating respect for her hosts while ensuring accessibility for international audiences. Media coverage continued to emphasize the historic nature of the Queen's train journey. International news networks provided ongoing commentary about the symbolism of traveling beneath the Channel, the engineering achievement the tunnel represented, and the broader implications for European unity. Social media platforms buzzed with images, commentary, and personal reactions from people around the world. French public reaction had been overwhelmingly positive. Opinion polls showed strong approval for hosting the Queen and appreciation for her decision to travel by Eurostar. Many French citizens expressed pride that their country was chosen for such a significant royal gesture. The combination of honoring D-Day veterans and demonstrating European cooperation resonated strongly with French national values. As afternoon approached, final preparations intensified for the main commemoration ceremony. The venue, chosen for its historic significance and capacity to accommodate the large gathering, had been transformed into an outdoor amphitheater suitable for international television coverage. French event organizers had worked with British protocol experts to create a program that would satisfy diplomatic requirements while remaining emotionally meaningful. The Queen used the remaining time before the ceremony to review her remarks one final time and to prepare mentally for what she knew would be an emotionally challenging event. Speaking to and about D-Day veterans always affected her deeply, particularly as their numbers continued to diminish with each passing year. This anniversary might be among the last with significant veteran participation. Prince Philip spent the afternoon reviewing the list of veterans who would be present, noting names of men he had met during previous commemorative events. His naval service during the war created personal connections with many of the honorees, and he looked forward to greeting old acquaintances while meeting veterans he had not previously encountered. The stage was set for an afternoon that would combine personal remembrance with international diplomacy, individual heroism with collective celebration, and past sacrifice with future commitment to peace and cooperation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ceremonial grounds as distinguished guests began taking their seats for the main D-Day commemoration. The venue, carefully chosen for both its historical significance and practical requirements, buzzed with quiet anticipation. Veterans in their 90s, some in wheelchairs, but all wearing their medals with pride, occupied places of honor near the speaking platform. Queen Elizabeth II arrived precisely on schedule, her presence immediately commanding attention from the assembled crowd. She had changed into a more formal outfit for the ceremony, a coat of powder blue with matching hat, chosen to honor both the occasion's solemnity and the beauty of the June afternoon. Her appearance drew murmurs of appreciation from the French spectators, many of whom were seeing the British monarch in person for the first time. President Hollande escorted the Queen to her seat, which had been positioned to provide clear views of both the speaker's platform and the veteran section. The seating arrangement reflected careful diplomatic consideration, close enough to demonstrate respect for the honorees, prominent enough to acknowledge her status as the ceremony's most distinguished guest, yet arranged to avoid overshadowing the veterans who were the event's true focus. Among the veterans present was Harold Chapman, a 92-year-old former Royal Navy gunner who had served aboard HMS Belfast during the D-Day bombardment. His grandson had accompanied him from Yorkshire, making this possibly Harold's final opportunity to participate in a major D-Day commemoration. The old sailor sat straighter when he noticed the Queen's arrival, his weathered hands adjusting the Royal Navy Association badge on his blazer lapel. The ceremony began with the Marseillaise, sung by a combined choir of French and British school children. Their young voices carried across the grounds with remarkable power, creating an emotional bridge between the aging warriors being honored and the generation who would inherit their legacy. The Queen stood throughout the anthem, her expression reflecting both respect for her hosts and deep personal connection to the memories being honored. President Hollande spoke first, his remarks delivered in French with simultaneous translation provided for international guests. He spoke of sacrifice, friendship, and the continuing importance of the alliance forged in the crucible of war. His words were carefully crafted to honor all allied nations while acknowledging the special relationship between Britain and France that had evolved from wartime cooperation to modern partnership. Today we remember, President Hollande declared, not just military victory, but the triumph of values that continue to guide our nations. Freedom, democracy, and human dignity were defended on the beaches of Normandy by young men who came from across the Atlantic and across the Channel. They came not as conquerors, but as liberators, and France has never forgotten their sacrifice. The crowd's response was warm, but restrained, appropriate to the ceremony's solemn purpose. Among the spectators, many elderly French citizens who remembered the German occupation nodded in agreement. Marie du Bois, now 89, had been a teenager in Paris during the war and vividly recalled the liberation celebrations in August 1944. Her presence today, along with that of other French civilians who had lived through the occupation, added authenticity to the remembrance. When President Hollande introduced Queen Elizabeth II, the applause was sustained and heartfelt. The French public's affection for the British monarch had grown throughout her reign, particularly as they witnessed her dedication to duty and her gracious handling of both triumphs and tragedies. Her decision to travel by Eurostar had captured French imagination, symbolizing the personal connection she felt to this anniversary. The Queen approached the podium with the measured grace that had characterized her public appearances for over 6 decades. She paused momentarily, surveying the crowd and making eye contact with veterans in the front rows. Her opening words, delivered in fluent French, drew immediate appreciation from the audience. Citizens of France, distinguished veterans, fellow commemorators of liberty, I am honored to stand with you on this sacred anniversary. Her speech, crafted over many weeks of preparation, combined personal memory with universal themes. She spoke of her own recollections as an 18-year-old princess on D-Day, describing the tension at Buckingham Palace and her family's prayers for the success of the invasion. Her words created intimate connection between her personal experience and the broader historical narrative. I remember that day, the Queen continued, now speaking in English, when news reached London that our forces had established foothold on the beaches of Normandy. My father, the King, spoke of divine providence and human courage working together to achieve what many had thought impossible. Today, 7 decades later, we can see that their faith was justified by the freedom we all enjoy. The veterans section stirred with visible emotion as the Queen spoke directly to them. You who answered the call to serve, who crossed dangerous waters to fight for freedom on foreign shores, you are the authors of the peace we celebrate today. Your sacrifice created not just military victory, but the foundation for the cooperation and friendship that now binds our nations together. Harold Chapman wiped tears from his eyes as the Queen's words reached him. He remembered the fear and determination he had felt as a young sailor approaching the Normandy coast 70 years earlier. The Queen's recognition of their service validated decades of carrying those memories, honoring not just their actions but the weight they had borne ever since. Prince Philip, seated among other distinguished guests, watched his wife deliver her remarks with the pride that came from witnessing her growth as a speaker and leader over their many years together. He had seen her address countless audiences, but speeches dealing with wartime service and sacrifice always brought out her most authentic emotions and most powerful oratory. The Queen's transition to French for her concluding remark surprised and delighted the audience. Leur prononciation was clairette, leur grammaire précise à chi de clarette. La France et la Grande-Bretagne, unies par l'histoire, liées par l'amitié, avançons ensemble vers l'avenir. France and Great Britain, united by history, bound by friendship, let us move forward together toward the future. The crowd erupted in sustained applause that reflected both appreciation for her linguistic effort and endorsement of her message. Following the Queen's address, the ceremony included readings from letters written by soldiers before the D-Day invasion. These personal documents, discovered in archives and family collections, provided intimate glimpses into the thoughts and fears of young men preparing for battle. French actor François Cluzet read excerpts in French, while British actor Jim Broadbent provided English translations. One letter particularly moved the audience, written by a 19-year-old paratrooper to his mother, describing his love for his family and his determination to help liberate France. The young soldier had died during the invasion, but his letter survived to inspire future generations. The Queen visibly reacted to this reading, placing her hand over her heart in a gesture that cameras captured and transmitted worldwide. The ceremony's musical interludes featured pieces significant to both British and French commemorative traditions. A Royal Marines bugler played the last post, its haunting notes carrying across the grounds and creating moments of profound silence. The French Naval Band responded with selections from their own military repertoire, demonstrating the shared martial traditions that had brought their nations together in battle. As the formal program concluded, the Queen moved among the veterans, spending personal time with as many as possible. These interactions, largely private conversations captured only occasionally by distant cameras, represented the ceremony's most meaningful moments. The Queen's genuine interest in each veteran's story, her patient listening, and her thoughtful responses created connections that would be treasured for whatever time remained to these elderly heroes. Her conversation with Harold Chapman lasted nearly 10 minutes, during which she learned about his service aboard HMS Belfast, his post-war career as a shipyard worker, and his pride in his grandson's military service in Afghanistan. The intergenerational connection, from D-Day veteran to modern soldier, illustrated the continuing relevance of the values they had fought to defend. The afternoon's events concluded with the laying of wreaths at a memorial constructed specifically for the anniversary. The Queen's wreath, composed of red poppies and white roses, bore a simple card in her own handwriting, in grateful remembrance of those who gave their lives for freedom. President Hollande's wreath featured similar simplicity, emphasizing remembrance over ceremony. As the official proceedings ended and guests began to depart, the Queen remained engaged with veterans and their families, reluctant to end what might be final opportunities for such conversations. Her genuine caring for these aging heroes reflected not just royal duty, but personal commitment to preserving their stories and honoring their sacrifice. The late afternoon light created perfect conditions for the final photographs of the ceremony, capturing images that would become historic records of this unprecedented royal visit and its meaningful commemoration of Allied victory. The combination of political symbolism, personal connection, and historical significance created moments that would be remembered long after the participants had passed into history themselves. As the golden hour approached over Paris, the Queen's historic visit began drawing toward its conclusion. The emotional weight of the afternoon ceremonies had left everyone involved deeply moved, but the return journey to London still awaited. The departure from Gare du Nord would mark the end of an unprecedented diplomatic and personal journey that had captured international attention and hearts worldwide. President Hollande accompanied the Queen to the station, their conversation during the short motorcade reflecting on the day's success and its broader implications for Franco-British relations. The French president expressed particular gratitude for the Queen's personal touch in speaking French during her address, noting that this gesture had been widely appreciated by the French public and media. "Your Majesty," President Hollande said as their vehicle approached the station, "your presence today honored not just our veterans but our entire nation. The fact that you chose to travel by train through the Channel Tunnel has created a symbol that will endure long after we are all gone." The Queen nodded thoughtfully, understanding that symbols often carried more lasting power than policies or treaties. Gare du Nord had been prepared for the royal departure with the same meticulous attention that had welcomed the Queen's arrival. However, the atmosphere was now tinged with the bittersweet quality that accompanies the end of significant events. Station staff who had worked extra shifts to ensure perfection stood proudly as the royal party returned to their train. The evening departure allowed different lighting and perspectives than the morning arrival. Television cameras captured the Queen's silhouette against the station's architectural grandeur, creating images that immediately became iconic representations of this historic day. The visual contrast between ancient monarchy and modern transportation technology provided powerful metaphors for the continuity and change that characterized her reign. Harold Chapman, the D-Day veteran who had spoken with the Queen at length during the ceremony, arrived at the station with his grandson to witness the departure. Despite his age and the day's emotional intensity, he was determined to see the Queen's journey through to completion. His presence, along with that of other veterans who had made similar efforts, demonstrated the personal connections forged during the afternoon's events. The Queen spent additional time on the platform before boarding, speaking with French officials, British embassy staff, and carefully selected members of the public. Her genuine interest in each person's story and her patience in answering questions reflected a lifetime of practice in making every interaction meaningful, even within the constraints of royal protocol and security requirements. Lady Susan Hussey coordinated the departure logistics while observing the Queen's interactions with subtle pride. After decades of royal service, she could recognize when her monarch was genuinely enjoying herself versus merely fulfilling duty. Today had clearly been personally meaningful for the Queen, connecting her to memories and relationships that transcended ceremonial obligations. Prince Philip, ever practical despite his 93 years, supervised the loading of gifts received during the visit. French officials had presented several items of historical significance, including reproductions of D-Day planning documents and a specially commissioned sculpture commemorating Anglo-French cooperation. These tangible mementos would find places at Windsor Castle, serving as permanent reminders of this extraordinary day. The return journey promised different experiences than the morning's outbound travel. Evening light would transform the French countryside, while the tunnel crossing would occur during twilight hours. The Queen looked forward to these variations, understanding that each royal journey offered unique perspectives on the landscapes and people she served. As boarding time approached, a final ceremony marked the departure. President Hollande presented the Queen with the Legion of Honor, France's highest decoration, in recognition of her contributions to French-British friendship throughout her reign. The award ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful, symbolizing France's appreciation for her lifetime of service to international cooperation. "This honor belongs not to me personally," the Queen responded, "but to the enduring friendship between our peoples. It represents the triumph of cooperation over conflict, understanding over suspicion, and hope over fear. I accept it on behalf of all who have worked to strengthen the bonds between Britain and France." The exchange of gifts continued with the Queen presenting President Hollande with a first edition of Winston Churchill's memoirs, personally inscribed with her thanks for the day's hospitality. The book choice reflected both historical significance and personal meaning. Churchill had been her first prime minister and had shaped her understanding of international relations during her early reign. Media coverage of the departure was extensive, with international news networks providing live coverage of the Queen's return to her train. Commentary focused on the day's achievements, successful commemoration of D-Day, strengthening of international relationships, and demonstration of the Queen's continuing vigor and relevance despite her advanced age. The boarding process reflected the same precision that had characterized the entire journey. Security sweeps were completed, communications equipment tested, and protocol requirements satisfied before the Queen stepped aboard. Her final wave from the platform drew sustained applause from assembled well-wishers, creating a moment of shared emotion that transcended national boundaries. Inside the train, the atmosphere was more relaxed than during the morning journey. The successful completion of the day's events allowed everyone to decompress while reflecting on what had been accomplished. The Queen settled into her seat with visible satisfaction, understanding that her unprecedented journey had achieved its diplomatic, symbolic, and personal objectives. The departure from Gare du Nord was precisely on time, maintaining Eurostar's reputation for punctuality while marking another successful element of royal logistics. As the train began moving, platform observers waved farewell while photographers captured final images of the historic visit. The Queen acknowledged their gestures through her window, maintaining contact with well-wishers until the train cleared the station. The evening journey through French countryside offered different but equally beautiful perspectives than the morning trip. Golden sunlight illuminated fields and villages, creating picturesque scenes that the Queen observed with continued interest. Her lifetime of travel had taught her to appreciate these varied views of the landscapes and communities that made up modern Europe. Conversation during the return journey focused on the day's success and its likely impact on future royal diplomacy. The Queen's willingness to travel by train had demonstrated flexibility and connection with ordinary people's experiences while achieving significant diplomatic objectives. The precedent might influence future royal travel decisions, particularly for European destinations accessible by high-speed rail. Prince Philip shared his observations about the veterans they had met, noting the continuing dignity and pride these elderly men displayed despite their advancing years. His naval background created natural connections with D-Day participants, allowing conversations that went beyond ceremonial politeness to genuine understanding and shared experience. The approach to the Channel Tunnel occurred during sunset, creating dramatic lighting as the train prepared to enter the underwater passage. The Queen reflected on the symbolic power of her journey, traveling beneath waters that had once separated warring nations to commemorate the alliance that had triumphed over tyranny and established foundations for lasting peace. The tunnel crossing passed smoothly, with barely perceptible changes in pressure or movement. The engineering achievement that made such comfortable travel possible continued to impress the Queen, representing the kind of international cooperation and technological advancement that characterized the post-war world the D-Day veterans had helped create. Emerging into English countryside as darkness fell, the train's lights illuminated familiar landscapes that welcomed the Queen home. The transition from French to English territory was seamless, reflecting the ease of modern European travel that contrasted sharply with the dangerous crossings attempted by Allied forces 70 years earlier. The approach to London revealed the capital's evening lights, a sight that never failed to move the Queen despite countless similar approaches over her long reign. Tonight, however, the city seemed especially welcoming, as if acknowledging her successful representation of British values and interests during the historic D-Day commemoration. St. Pancras International came into view as the train completed its return journey. The station, bustling with evening travelers, provided appropriate contrast to the morning's ceremonial departure. Life continued its normal rhythms, but the Queen's unprecedented journey had added new chapters to the ongoing story of European cooperation and friendship. The arrival at St. Pancras was met by senior government officials, royal household staff, and carefully managed media coverage. The successful completion of this historic round trip represented achievement not just for royal logistics, but for the broader symbolism of British engagement with European partners and commitment to honoring shared history. As the Queen stepped onto British soil after her underground continental journey, she carried with her renewed appreciation for the sacrifices that had made such travel possible. The veterans she had met, the French friends who had welcomed her, and the successful commemoration of D-Day's 70th anniversary had combined to create one of the most meaningful and unprecedented royal visits of her long reign. The journey from Street Pancras to Windsor Castle would complete this extraordinary day, but the memories and meanings created during her historic Eurostar adventure would endure far longer than any single trip. The Queen had demonstrated that even at 88, she remained capable of creating new traditions, strengthening international relationships, and honoring the past while embracing the future.